This is the incredible story of Sophie, a struggling young woman whose simple act of kindness changed her life forever. She had no idea that helping an old woman on the road would lead to the biggest blessing she could ever dream of. Sophie sat under a big mango tree by a dusty road, holding a small nylon bag of food. Tears streamed down her face. Her eyes were swollen, and her clothes were old and faded. She hadn't eaten since yesterday, but her thoughts weren't on herself. Her younger brother, Caleb, hadn't eaten either. Ever since the accident that took their parents' lives, Caleb could barely walk and now used wooden crutches to get around. Tired and weak, Sophie looked at the sky. The food in her bag was all she could afford. "God, please," she whispered, "Caleb is suffering. I don't know what else to do." As Sophie wiped her tears, a weak voice spoke, "My daughter, please help me. I haven't eaten since yesterday." Sophie looked up. It was an old woman with a tired face, wearing a torn wrapper. She had no bag, no food, just a worn-out slipper and sadness in her eyes. The woman pointed to Sophie's nylon bag. "Can you spare some of your food, please?" she asked gently. Sophie clutched the bag to her chest. "I'm sorry," she said, "it's for my brother. He hasn't eaten, and he's sick." She held the food tighter, her voice shaking. "I'd love to help you, but this is the only food for us." She quickly wiped her face. "He's very hungry, he didn't eat yesterday, and he can't walk well." The old woman looked down, saying nothing. Slowly, she walked to a nearby stone and sat down, placing a hand on her chest as if in deep pain. "My daughter," she said softly, "even one bite will save me." Sophie looked at her again. The old woman's feet were dry and dusty, her wrapper torn, her hands shaking. She looked like she'd walked a long way. Sophie's throat felt dry. She looked at the food in her hand, then back at the woman. Something inside her felt heavy. Sophie closed her eyes, her heart pounding. When she opened them again, the woman's lips were dry, her hands still shaking. She sat quietly, waiting, but not begging anymore. Sophie slowly knelt beside her, untied the nylon bag, and took out the small white plate. It was still warm. "Take it," Sophie said in a quiet voice. The woman looked at her with surprise, her eyes filling with tears. "God bless you, child," she whispered. There was silence, but in Sophie's heart, something felt strange. She didn't know this was the moment her life was about to change forever. When Sophie got home, she pushed open the wooden door and walked into their small room. Caleb sat by the window, staring at the sky. His eyes lit up when he saw her. "Sophie," he called out, "did you bring the food?" Sophie stood by the door and nodded slowly. "I did, but I gave it to an old woman. She was hungry too." Caleb's face fell. "But I'm so hungry, Sophie," he said weakly. Sophie quickly walked to him and sat beside him, hugging him tightly. "I know, Caleb, I know." Her eyes were wet. "I didn't want to," she said quietly, "but when I saw her sitting there, weak and tired, my heart couldn't leave her." Caleb leaned on her shoulder. After a moment of silence, Caleb looked up at her. "Will we ever be okay, Sophie?" Sophie didn't answer, she just held him tighter. Later that morning, Sophie went to work at the construction site. Her job was to fetch water and fill large drums. The sun was hot, the ground dry, and her legs felt tired, her hands heavy. She hadn't eaten anything that morning. With every bucket she carried, her body felt weaker. She tried to smile at her coworkers, but her lips felt dry. By afternoon, she couldn't stand straight. She dropped her bucket and slowly walked to a nearby tree, sitting on the dry sand. Her head was hot. She leaned back and closed her eyes for a moment, but that moment stretched longer, and before she knew it, she had fallen asleep. Mr. Amos, the supervisor, walked onto the construction site, wearing a shirt and dark glasses. He looked around. Workers were carrying sand, mixing cement, and pouring water, but Sophie was nowhere in sight. "Where's that lady?" he asked one of the men. The man pointed toward the tree. "I think she went there to rest." Mr. Amos walked quickly to the tree. He saw Sophie lying on the ground, eyes closed. She looked tired, her clothes dusty, sweat covering her face. He stood over her and shouted, "So you're sleeping when others are working?" Sophie jumped up quickly, her heart pounding. "I'm sorry, sir," she said, shaking. "I didn't mean to sleep. I was just tired." "Tired?" Mr. Amos shouted again. "Am I paying you to sleep?" Sophie opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Her legs felt weak, her eyes looked down at the sand. Mr. Amos laughed, but it wasn't a kind laugh. "You are lazy," he shouted. "Get out of my sight this minute." "Please, sir," Sophie said, kneeling down, "please don't send me away. I need this job." Mr. Amos turned his back and walked off. "You won't get a dime from me, not even 1 naira." Sophie watched him leave, her hands dropping to her sides. Tears rolled down her face. She turned and walked home slowly, her legs shaking, her eyes barely seeing the road. When she reached home, Caleb was still sitting by the window. The moment he saw her, he knew something was wrong. "Sophie," he said softly, "what happened?" She sat on the floor and covered her face. "I lost the job," she said. Caleb crawled to her and held her hand. "What will we do now?" he asked. Sophie didn't answer. They both sat in silence. Then Caleb looked up at the ceiling and said, "Dad, Mom, we are suffering." Tears fell from Sophie's eyes as she joined in the quiet prayer. That night, the small room was quiet. Caleb had fallen asleep early, his arms wrapped around a pillow. Sophie sat on the floor, her back against the wall. She wasn't sleepy. Her eyes stayed open as she stared at the old zinc roof. A small drop of water fell from the leaking corner. The room was hot, but she still covered Caleb's legs with a wrapper. She looked at him for a long time. Sophie placed her hand on his chest gently and sighed. She whispered, "God, I don't know what to do anymore. Please help me. My brother needs food, he needs a doctor. Please show me what to do." She wiped her face and looked up again, then closed her eyes and prayed silently. She didn't know when sleep took her away. The next day, Sophie went to a more developed part of the city. She walked slowly on a long street, her feet dusty. She had searched for work all morning, but no one wanted her. She passed a large house with flowers in front. A small wooden board was tied to the gate. It said, "Housekeeper needed urgently. Apply in person." Sophie stopped. She looked at the board again, her heart starting to beat fast. She looked at the sky and said softly, "God, help me." She turned back and stood in front of the gate. Should I knock? What if they say no? She touched the gate with her knuckles and stopped. She breathed in, looked at the sign again, and whispered, "Please God, let this be the one." Then she knocked. A few seconds passed. She heard slow footsteps inside. The gate creaked open. A man in a brown security uniform looked at her from head to toe. "Yes, what do you want?" the man asked. Sophie swallowed hard. "I saw the sign, sir. I'm here for the housekeeper work." The security man looked at Sophie from head to toe again. "You came for the housekeeper job?" he asked. Sophie nodded quickly. "Yes, sir." He looked back into the compound, then turned to her. "The boss isn't around now," he said, "but you can come back tomorrow morning. He will want to see you himself." Sophie's face fell a little. "Please, sir," she said, "can I just wait for him?" The man shook his head. "No need. He doesn't like strangers waiting at the gate. Just come early tomorrow, before 8. Sophie nodded slowly. "Thank you, sir. I will come." She turned and walked out of the gate. The man stood and watched her walk away for a while, then closed the gate gently. As Sophie walked down the dusty road, her legs felt weak, but her heart was full of hope. She looked up at the sky. "God, please don't let me miss this chance," she whispered. As she approached her house, she saw someone ahead. It was the same old woman she had given food to, the one with the tired eyes and torn slippers. She was carrying a heavy sack on her back. The sack looked too heavy for her. The woman walked slowly, bending forward. Sophie ran to her quickly. "Mama," she called out. The old woman turned. "You again," the woman said, breathing hard. "Ah, my daughter, God bless you." Sophie held the sack. "Let me help you, Mama. This is too heavy." The old woman smiled. "You are truly a child of light," she said. "May your days be full of joy." Sophie smiled, even though her arms hurt as she lifted the sack. As they walked together, the woman asked, "How is your brother?" Sophie looked down. "Still the same." The old woman nodded. "You helped me when you had nothing. Heaven saw it. Good will come to you." Sophie smiled but said nothing for a while. Then the woman stopped and placed her hand on her chest. "My name is Deborah, but you can call me Mama D," she said with a small smile. Sophie's face lit up. "Deborah. Wow, that name is beautiful. I like it." Mama D smiled again. "Thank you, my child. What's your name?" "My name is Sophie," she replied softly. They kept walking slowly, one step at a time, both quiet. The next morning, Sophie woke up before the sun. She got water, bathed quickly, and wore the neatest dress she had. She combed her hair well and tied it with a scarf. Before leaving, she looked at Caleb, who was still sleeping. She kissed his forehead. "Pray for me," she whispered. When she got to the big house, the guard from yesterday saw her and smiled. "You came early," he said, opening the gate. "Yes, sir, thank you so much," Sophie replied. He let her in. A tall man with a calm face and bright eyes sat on a chair in the compound. He wore a clean shirt and held a cup of tea. He looked at Sophie carefully. "You're here for the housekeeper job?" he asked. "Yes, sir," Sophie said, standing straight. The man put down his cup. "I'm Mr. Sampson. I own this house." "You can sit," he said, pointing to a chair across from him. Sophie nodded and sat down. "Can you clean everywhere properly?" he asked. "Yes, sir." Mr. Sampson looked at her for a long time. Then he spoke clearly. "This job isn't for someone to live in. You'll come in the morning, clean the whole house, wash clothes, and do whatever needs to be done. By evening, you go back home. You understand?" "Yes, sir," Sophie said quickly. "I'm fine with that." Mr. Sampson smiled. "Good. You're hired." Sophie's mouth opened slightly. "Sir, really?" "Yes," Mr. Sampson said. "You look honest." "I believe in honest people." Sophie covered her mouth. "Thank you, sir." "Thank you so much." Mr. Sampson waved his hand. "Start tomorrow." As Sophie stepped out of the compound, her legs felt light, her heart was full. Maybe, just maybe, her story was beginning to change. Sophie ran home, her slippers making soft sounds on the ground. Her heart was beating fast, but this time not from fear, it was from joy. As she reached their small house, she opened the door and shouted, "Caleb!" Caleb sat on the mat, looking weak, but when he saw her smile, he sat up quickly. "What happened?" he asked, eyes wide. Sophie laughed and fell to her knees beside him. "I got the job. They gave me the housekeeper job." Caleb's eyes became wet. He pulled Sophie close and hugged her tight. "You did it, Sophie. You really did it," he whispered. She held him tighter. "Now we can save money," she said. "We can start planning for your surgery." Caleb nodded slowly. "I believe again," he said. A few days later, after work, Sophie and Caleb took a slow walk near the road. The evening breeze touched their faces. Caleb held her hand as they walked, using his wooden crutches carefully, one slow step at a time. Suddenly, Sophie saw someone ahead. It was Mama D. She looked tired and was dragging 2 large bags behind her. The bags looked too heavy for her. The woman walked slowly, bending forward. "Mama!" Sophie called out. Mama D looked up, her face lit up with surprise. "You again," she said, running to her. Caleb followed slowly. "Let me help you," Sophie said, picking up one bag. Mama D smiled. "You both have kind hearts." When they reached a quiet spot, Mama D looked at Caleb closely. She placed her hand gently on his head, then touched his legs. She closed her eyes. "You will walk well again, my son." Caleb looked at her, his eyes full of emotion. "Thank you, Mama," he said softly. They all smiled, then walked down the street together. Every morning, Sophie arrived at Mr. Sampson's house before the sun rose high. She knocked gently on the gate. The guard opened for her. "Morning," he said. Inside the big house, Sophie worked hard. She swept the floors, washed Mr. Sampson's clothes and hung them neatly, cleaned the chairs, the windows, and even the corners. She never complained. When she finished, she wiped her face and smiled. Sometimes Mr. Sampson sat outside reading a newspaper. He watched her closely. She didn't talk too much, she worked like the house was hers. One afternoon, he called her. "Sophie," he said. She turned quickly. "Yes, sir." He looked at her closely. "You're very quiet, and you work with your whole heart." Sophie smiled shyly. "Thank you, sir." Mr. Sampson nodded slowly. "Keep it up," he said. She bowed her head. "Yes, sir." But deep in his heart, something was growing. He didn't know what it was yet. One evening, Mr. Sampson drove into his compound and stepped out of his car. He looked tired, his shoulders were slumped, and his face looked heavy. As he opened the door to his sitting room, he stopped. On the table was a hot plate of food, yam porridge, fresh and smelling sweet. A small note was beside it. It read, "Good evening, sir. I thought you might be hungry after a long day at work. I hope this helps. Sophie." Mr. Sampson stood still. He didn't move. He just stared at the food and then at the note again. He pulled a chair and sat down slowly. He didn't eat yet. He just sat there thinking. His eyes moved to the kitchen. The pots were clean, the dishes were washed, the floor was neat. He looked back at the food. Cooking was not part of Sophie's job. She was only meant to clean and leave by evening, but she had gone beyond what was asked of her. "No one has ever done this for me since my cook traveled," he said to himself. He touched the note again and smiled. "Sophie," he whispered, "who are you, really?" The next day, Mr. Sampson sat in his room with his phone pressed to his ear. He was talking to his mother. His voice was calm, but his eyes looked tired. "Mama, you know I want you to stay here with me," he said. His mother's voice came from the other end. "I know, my son, but I won't stay in that big house with you. I have my reasons." Sampson sighed. "You only visit once in a while. I miss you." She laughed a little. "I miss you too, but that place is too quiet for me." Then her voice changed. "Sampson, what about your future? You're not getting younger." Sampson looked at the floor. "Mama, please, not again." She continued, "You don't even have a fiancé. Look at your friends, all of them are married with children." Sampson kept quiet. "I'm not saying you must marry now," she said, "but at least have someone close, someone with a good heart. In fact, I have someone in mind, someone I've been observing for a while now. She's perfect for a wife. I'll arrange your meeting with her. Please don't say no." "I understand," he said softly. They spoke for a few more minutes, then ended the call. Mr. Sampson lay on his bed, deep in thought. Outside, the night was quiet. Inside, his heart was not. One day, Mr. Sampson sat in his living room, pretending to read the newspaper, but his eyes were not on the paper. They were on Sophie. She was outside sweeping the front of the house. Mr. Sampson watched from the window, his heart beating slow but hard. "She's not like other girls," he whispered to himself. Later that afternoon, Sophie came inside to mop the sitting room. "Good afternoon, sir," she said politely. "Good afternoon, Sophie," he replied. As she worked, he kept looking at her from time to time. Her steps were calm, her hands moved gently. She didn't speak unless she needed to. Mr. Sampson looked down at his own hands. He had never felt this way before. He shook his head a little and smiled. "Why is my heart beating like this?" he whispered. But deep inside, he knew the answer. That same week, Sampson was in his office getting ready to leave for the day. He had packed his laptop into his bag and was zipping it up when his phone rang. He picked it up and saw the name Mom. He smiled and answered, "Mama, good evening." Her voice came through soft and cheerful. "My son, how are you?" "I'm fine, Mama, just about to leave the office." She cleared her throat and said, "I've been thinking. I want to come and spend a few days with you." "You mean it?" he asked. "Yes," she replied, "I'll come tomorrow if that's okay." He smiled deeply. "Thank you, Mom. I've missed you." "I've missed you too," she said. "Okay, Mama, I'll be waiting." They said goodbye and ended the call. It was a quiet morning. Sophie was inside the sitting room dusting the chairs like she always did. She wiped every corner and moved slowly to the next one. Just then, Mr. Sampson walked in. He stood by the door and watched her for a while before speaking. "Sophie," he said softly. She turned quickly. "Yes, sir." He stepped closer. "Please clean the guest room. My mother will be coming over, and she is staying for a few days," he said. Sophie nodded. "All right, sir, I will clean it now." Then Mr. Sampson looked at her with calm eyes. He paused for a moment and said gently, "Please be on your best behavior." Sophie stood still for a second. She didn't understand why he said that, but she didn't ask. She only nodded. "Yes, sir." As he walked away, she continued her duty. Later that afternoon, Sophie was in the dining room, wiping the table, trying to make everything shine. She wanted the place to look very neat. After all, it was the boss's mother who was coming. Just as she was cleaning the dining table, she heard a knock on the door. Mr. Sampson quickly stood from his chair in the study and walked to the door. Sophie turned her head, watching from the dining area. He opened the door. The moment the door opened, Mr. Sampson smiled wide. "Mom," he said. He stepped forward and gave the woman a big hug. Sophie stood upright and looked closely, but as soon as her eyes saw the woman's face, she froze. The hand towel was still in her hand, her legs stopped moving, her mouth slowly opened. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. The woman Mr. Sampson was hugging was someone she had met before, someone she had helped. Sophie stood still like a statue. The room felt quiet in her ears. She whispered to herself, "No, it can't be." Sophie stood still, holding the cleaning cloth in her hand, her eyes wide. She could not believe what she was seeing. Standing by the door, smiling and holding a small handbag, was Mama D, the same old woman she used to help by the roadside, the same woman who looked poor, who she had once given her last food to. "Mama D," Sophie said in a weak, shocked voice. Mama D's smile slowly dropped. She blinked, trying to understand. "Sophie," she said softly. They both stared at each other in complete shock. Mr. Sampson stood between them, confused. He looked at Sophie, then at his mother, then back at Sophie. "Wait," Sampson said, walking closer, "do you two know each other?" Sophie's mouth was still slightly open. She looked down and nodded slowly. Mama D said nothing, she just looked around the house, then back at Sophie, then at her son. Sampson narrowed his eyes. "What's going on here?" he asked again, this time more serious. Mama D took a deep breath and said quietly, "Let's all sit down." They all moved to the living room. The air felt heavy, like something big was about to be said. Sophie sat at the edge of the chair, looking worried. Samson folded his arms, waiting. Mama D sat gently, then looked at Sophie with a kind smile. Then she turned to her son and said, "Samson, there is something I didn't tell you. I did something behind your back, but I did it for a reason." Samson raised his eyebrows, confused. "I went out dressed like a poor woman," she continued. "I did it because I wanted to test the hearts of young girls." She turned to Sophie again, who was now sitting with her head low, wiping quiet tears from her cheeks. "She didn't know who I was. She didn't do it because of money or favor. She helped me from her heart." Mama D continued, "Even when she had nothing, she gave me her last food." Sophie sniffed quietly, trying to stay calm. "She helped me carry heavy things when no one else would stop. And even with all that, she still talked about her brother, how he was crippled, how she needed money to pay for his surgery. Yet she still found the strength to help me." Mama D shook her head slowly. "She is not just kind, she is rare," Mama D said with a proud smile, "the kind of woman a man should never take for granted." The room was silent again. Samson didn't move. He sat still, staring at the floor, deep in thought. Then slowly, he leaned back into the chair. His eyes were blank and his lips tight. He still didn't say a word. A heavy silence filled the room. Then Samson slowly stood up from the chair, his hands in his pockets. He didn't look at anyone. Without saying a word, he turned and walked to his room. The door didn't slam, he just closed it quietly behind him. Inside his room, Samson walked to the window. He stood there, staring out at the blue sky. His heart was full. He thought about all the times he had seen Sophie working, how she cleaned, how she cooked even when it was not part of her job, how she always smiled. He had always wondered why she looked so calm, so strong, even when it was clear she had her own problems. Now he knew. She wasn't just doing her job. She was just being Sophie, Samson whispered to himself. He kept staring outside, his mind racing. In the living room, Mama D looked at Sophie and gave her a gentle pat on the shoulder. "My dear, wipe your tears," she said softly. "Good hearts like yours don't go unnoticed forever." Sophie looked up slowly, eyes still wet, heart still shaking. But deep inside her, something warm was beginning to rise. She looked at the clock on the wall, her eyes widened. She stood up quickly and said, "Thank you, Ma. I need to go take care of my brother now." Mama D held her hand gently. "Please stay a little," she said softly, "just a few more minutes." But Sophie smiled, though her eyes looked tired. "I really want to, Ma, but I can't. My brother is waiting for me. He hasn't eaten, and his leg was hurting this morning." Mama D stared at her for a while, her heart full. "You're a strong girl," she said. "Your brother is lucky to have you." Sophie nodded slowly. "He's all I have, Mama." She turned to leave. Mama D followed her to the door. "Please be careful," Mama D said, "and greet him for me." Sophie smiled, then walked out. As she left, Mama D stood at the door, looking after her, her eyes teary. She placed her hand on her chest. "That girl," she whispered to herself, "God really brought her for a reason." That night, the house was quiet, the lights were low. Mama D walked slowly to her son's room. She knocked softly. "Come in," Samson's voice came. She opened the door and entered. Samson was sitting on the bed, holding a book but not reading it. Mama D sat beside him. "I'm sorry," she said gently. Samson looked at her. "For what, Mom?" "For not telling you earlier about what I was doing," she said. "I only wanted to find a wife for you, but not just any woman, a woman with a clean heart." Samson closed the book and placed it beside him. "Mom," he said quietly, "I think I already know." Mama D looked at him with surprise. "You know what?" she asked. Samson sighed. His face looked calm but serious. "I've been watching Sophie too," he said, "not because of your plan, I didn't even know about it. But something about her just touched me." Mama D listened closely. She doesn't pretend, he continued. She doesn't talk too much. She just does the right thing, even when no one is looking, even when she's tired. There was silence for a few seconds. Then Samson said, "Mom, I care about her deeply. I think I'm falling for her." Mama D jumped up from where she was seated and clapped her hands. "My son, then follow your heart. Don't waste time." Samson smiled a little, but his eyes still looked far away. "Mom," he said, "what if she says no?" Mama D sat back and held his hand. "She won't. A girl like Sophie doesn't give her time to just anyone. You've already entered her heart, she just doesn't know it yet." The next morning was quiet. The sun was just coming out. Samson stood outside the gate, his hands in his pockets. His eyes kept looking down the road. He had not slept much all night. He kept thinking about Sophie, about her smile, her soft voice, the way she always helped without talking too much. Then he saw her. Sophie was coming slowly, carrying her small nylon bag. Her scarf was tied neatly. She looked energetic but peaceful. Samson's heart beat faster. He smiled gently. As she walked closer, he said in his mind, "That's her. That's the woman I want, not because of her face, but because of her heart." He stood still, waiting. As Sophie got close, she greeted, "Good morning, sir." "Good morning, Sophie," he replied. She didn't know he had been standing there just for her. She didn't know today was not going to be a normal day. Samson turned and watched her enter the house. As she walked into the house, she went to greet Mama D. "Good morning, Mama," Sophie said, bowing a little. Mama D smiled warmly. "Good morning, my daughter. How is your brother?" "He's fine, Ma, thank you," Sophie replied softly. Mama D touched her shoulder gently. "May God bless you, my daughter." "Thank you, Ma," Sophie said again, and went on to start her work. As she turned to leave after cleaning, she heard his voice. "Sophie," Mr. Samson called. She turned around. "Sir, please come," he said, still seated. She walked to him and stood beside the chair. She looked at him and noticed something was different. He was smiling, but it was a quiet smile. He looked up at her and said, "There's something I want to tell you." Sophie nodded, her eyes looking unsure. Samson stood up. He took a deep breath, then looking straight into her eyes, he said clearly, "Sophie, I want to marry you." The room went quiet. Sophie froze. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. She looked down, then looked up again. Her hands were shaking a little. After a few seconds, she said in a soft voice, "Sir, I'm not saying no, but I want to think about it." Samson nodded gently. "Take your time, Sophie," he said. "I'll be waiting." She gave a small nod, picked up her bag, and walked out of the house. But her mind was not calm, her heart was full of questions, full of thoughts. She kept thinking as she walked home, is this real? Can this be true, or am I dreaming? From that day, Sophie began to watch Mr. Samson closely. She didn't want to rush her answer. She wanted to be sure of the kind of man he really was. One morning, she came early and sat on the bench near the backyard. From there, she could see the front gate. The gateman walked up to Mr. Samson, looking worried. "Sir, the plumber said he can't come today. He said there's traffic." Mr. Samson sighed and looked at his time. "Call him again. Tell him if he can't make it, we'll look for another person. This isn't the first time he's doing this." The gateman nodded quickly and walked away. Mr. Samson didn't raise his voice, he didn't insult anyone. He just spoke clearly, like a leader. Sophie nodded to herself quietly. Later that week, 2 of Mr. Samson's staff came to the house to drop some files. One of them was shaking a little, like he was scared. Mr. Samson took the file and said, "You're late, but since this is your first time, I'll let it go. Next time, call ahead." "Yes, sir," the young man replied, looking down. Mr. Samson patted his shoulder gently. "You're doing okay, just be more serious with your time." They both smiled, and Sophie watched everything from the kitchen door. She began to see something different. Mr. Sampson was not soft, he was not weak, but he was fair. He corrected people, but he didn't insult them. He had power, but he didn't use it to bring fear. She also noticed how he loved and cared for his mother. He always asked if she needed anything. He sat with her some evenings, listening to her talk about village stories. Sophie started to smile to herself. Every new thing she saw made her feel safe. At night, she would lie down beside her brother and think. One evening, she whispered to herself, "If I say yes, I think I'll be saying yes to a good man." A week later, Sophie came into the house wearing a long yellow gown. Her hair was neat, her face was glowing. Mama D was in the kitchen. Mr. Sampson was reading a file in the sitting room. Sophie walked in slowly. "Good morning, sir," she said. Mr. Sampson looked up and smiled. "Sophie, good morning." She walked closer and stopped in front of him. "I've been thinking," she said. He closed the file and looked up at her, his eyes focused. "I've thought about everything," she continued, "and now I'm sure." She smiled and said clearly, "I will marry you." Mr. Sampson jumped up. He couldn't hide it. His eyes grew wide, his mouth opened in joy. He hugged her tight, not too tight, but with all his heart. "Thank you, Sophie," he whispered, "thank you." Just then, Mama D walked into the room. She saw them standing together and stopped. "What's going on?" she asked with a small smile. Sophie turned to her and said, "Mama, I said yes." Mama D dropped the spoon in her hand and screamed, "Thank you, Lord." She started dancing around the sitting room. She clapped her hands, she sang loudly, "My son has found a wife, a good wife. Thank you, Lord." Mr. Sampson and Sophie laughed together. Sophie's heart felt light, but deep inside, she knew this was just the beginning. Sophie sat beside Mr. Sampson in the living room. She held her phone and showed him something. Sampson, she said shyly, "I've been thinking. I want to go back to school." He looked at her, surprised. "Really? That's a good idea. Do you want to go to a campus?" She shook her head. "No, I want to study online. That way I can still help with the business." Sampson smiled. "Say no more." He devised a plan and enrolled her in a top online university. He paid her tuition in full and even got her a new laptop and study desk. But that wasn't all. He also found out what Sophie truly loved, cooking. So, without telling her, he set up a surprise. He drove her to a busy street in town. Right there, a new shop stood, shining with bright colors. Sophie stepped down from the car, confused. "Why are we here?" she asked. Sampson gave her the key. "This is your shop, Sophie," he said. "You're now the head of your own catering business." Sophie covered her mouth with both hands. She looked at the name on the signboard, Sophie's Delight Kitchen, and tears filled her eyes. "But why are you doing all this?" she asked softly. Sampson looked into her eyes. "Because you deserve it. And I know you don't want to just sit at home. You want to work, you want to earn, and I love that about you." Sophie hugged him tightly, her heart full. But the biggest gift came later. One morning, Sophie was sitting outside in the compound when a doctor walked in. "Good news," he said. "We got the support we needed. Caleb can finally have the surgery." Sophie jumped up, shocked. "Are you serious?" The doctor nodded. "Your husband paid everything already." Sophie turned to Sampson, who was standing quietly by the door. She ran to him and hugged him again. Weeks later, Caleb had the surgery. The whole family waited outside the hospital, praying. When Caleb finally came out and took his first step, Sophie fell on her knees and cried. Her brother could walk again. Months passed, and then came the wedding. Sophie wore a long white dress, her smile as bright as the morning sun. Sampson stood beside her, proud and happy. Rich men and women filled the hall. Mama D danced and danced until her legs got tired. There was food, there was music, there was joy everywhere. Sophie looked at Caleb, who was now walking well and even dancing. She looked at Samson and held his hand. Her voice was low, but her heart was full. God has given me a new life, she said. That day, Sophie knew her days of sorrow were over. She had found love, peace, and a fresh beginning. And this time, it was forever. And that's how Sophie's life changed forever. From helping a seemingly poor old woman carry her heavy load and feeding her when she was hungry, she became the wife of a kind billionaire. What's the lesson here? Sometimes, the small good you do for a stranger can open a door you never expected. Kindness may seem insignificant, but it carries great rewards. So, never stop doing good, even when no one is watching.